So as we've been focusing more on character tech and character customization and character modularity, we've been focusing on all the different armor sets that we've been working on. One of the things that we ran into as we were doing this was all of our legacy armor sets. Legacy basically means something that's been around for a really long time. So we're kind of looking at the light, medium, and heavy of the Marines and light, medium, heavy of the Outlaws or Pirates as something that was eventually going to have to be addressed. As we were making headway on the character customization front with doing arms and helmets and cores and legs and undersuits and kind of really building this whole customization system so that the players can customize their character, we realized that the older legacy sets were not really built with that in mind. So we knew that eventually we were going to have to address that issue, and the way that we're going to address that is by rebuilding them. So what it was that wasn't working for the legacy armors was that they weren't built into all those pieces. They were essentially one solid mesh, and even when you were able to select the character or buy the armor, you could only buy the whole set at one time. You were not able to buy a helmet, you were not able to buy any of the individual pieces. It was just kind of a whole thing. But as we've been saying, we want the players to be able to really customize their armor, be able to customize their space suits, be able to customize as much as they can about their character. We really wanted to focus on that, and the legacy armors really just didn't fit that at all. So we played around with a couple options. We played around with maybe just being able to save the helmets, because the helmets were actually a separate mesh, separate material. So we would be able to save them and use that as an existing item. But then we would still have to figure out or possibly rework the whole rest of the body. That wasn't really something we wanted to do, because even though the mesh was working for the helmets, it wasn't even using the correct shaders. So they weren't optimized. So one of the things, when we get really heavy into talking to customization and characters and stuff like that, really any game asset is draw calls. A draw call is essentially how much something costs to render, and the older style uses a different type of maps, which me and Forrest have talked about before, different materials or different shaders. But the new ones use something called the layer blend, and the layer blend is now working on all of our materials except for the legacy ones. So if we kept the helmets, they would still be using old materials and old technology, which is still kind of a problem. They wouldn't be optimized, they wouldn't be working. So rather than fight against trying to keep something that realistically doesn't work as well as it could, we decided to just kind of start from scratch on them. We want to be clear to keep the original designs and intent and even the names as close as possible. But we're starting from scratch so that each one of them will have their own chest piece, arm piece, legs piece, and head piece. So you'll eventually be able to, as where you weren't able to before, customize. Let's say you like the legacy Marines. Let's say you liked the heavy chest piece and the light helmet and the medium arms and so forth. Now you'll be able to combine those and create your own legacy Marine set, which is completely unique to you.
I think the hardest thing to do in concept when designing something that requires different manufacturers put together and not making it look ragtag and messy. The biggest problem that I've encountered doing that was the lines on the costume have to make sense, but it can't be so chaotic where it's so messy to look at. So I had to find a fine line between, okay, I have to make things look like this person or this outlaw picked a shoulder pad from here and then maybe a chest piece from here and a helmet from here, but then still make sure the lines of the character and the costume still made sense and was aesthetically pleasing. And so that's the hardest part, I think, for mishmashing different types of manufacturers. So I guess we get around that hurdle by lines on the costume. I think that's the biggest key. We can still make it look like a bunch of things were put together randomly, but we can strategically place lines on the character and also the breakups and where the materials fall on the character, so it looks aesthetically pleasing and yet still look like it was kind of like scavenged together and put together.
So let's talk about the Legacy Outlaws first. The Legacy Outlaws are super fun. I think that there's a lot of really cool design elements to them, but we definitely want to spice them all up. Right now we're working on the Legacy Light, Medium, and Heavy, and all three of them are in different phases of production. So our Legacy Light, we recently posted in our sneak peeks the concept art for that. And some of the stuff we're trying to keep in mind with the Legacy light armor is the most iconic thing to me is his helmet. So he has this kind of, there's like an understructure to his helmet, and then on top of that is like this glass dome, and then in the glass dome there's like two red circles that are like HUDs that you kind of see. So that's the main iconic piece that we want to keep for that armor. And we're trying to do that with all of our armors, really. We're looking at each one of them and saying, what's the most iconic element to this armor? What's the thing that we really like, that they really get attached to? You know, if I step back 200 feet and look at this armor, what's the thing that I see that I can really pick out? And that, for me, is the most iconic piece of the light. So right now we're in high poly with that, and it's moving along really well. We're also designing a separate undersuit for this armor, and this is actually going to work as our general kind of legacy outlaw undersuit. So we'll be able to use this with any of our undersuits and with any of our armors, not just the legacy ones, not just the marine ones, but any of our upcoming armors as well.
I've been working with Jeremiah. He did a gorgeous concept, and I've kind of gone back and forth with him and Josh too on changes, alterations to the model so that all the pieces become modular with our new system, so that players can swap items out in the future, and making it a functional thing. But the real idea of it is that we, kind of pay homage to the outlaw light that's been in the game for a long time, but really needs an update so that it's consistent with, the current characters that we're producing, right? Because we don't want there to be a quality drop-off, but we also realize we can't give these guys a hook because people like them. They're cool characters, and they've been in the game forever, and they are kind of a shout-out to people who have been with Star Citizen since, its formidable days. We're trying to design something new that also recalls the designs of the past, which is kind of challenging. And Jeremiah's, he's Jeremiah. He's awesome on that stuff. He is easy to work with on that stuff. And in the process of fleshing out the high poly sculpt, I'm trying to keep it real detailed. And this should be one of the lightest light armors that we've got in the game, I think. The helmet is probably one of the tightest full helmets that actually covers part of the face, which is hard to do in conjunction with animation and mocap, because since we're using actual head scans of actual actors, everybody's face is different, so that can you have to account for that. But that being said, it's a really tight fitting helmet. It's kind of menacing looking and kind of has this skull-like feel to it. Which is something we've tried to retain from the original designs, like a cobbled together machined skull underneath like a visor. And then same thing with the armor. It's also probably one of the light armors that we have in the game. I think we were really trying to introduce the idea of like a mixed media look in some of the armors, like not just metals and carbon fibers, but also like fabrics, possibly like leathers, knits and weaves and stuff like that. There's possibly going to be some cloth sim on this character. So it should be pretty cool when it's all said and done. Those are all things that I like about it, and I liked about the original concept.
So the undersuit is basically something that you have to equip to go into EVA. EVA means you are able to go into space, that you are vacuum sealed. And basically all it is it's a jumpsuit that has boots and gloves, and then it kind of goes up to your neck. And the theory is that all you would have to do is just pop on a helmet, and then you'd be able to go take a spacewalk. And all of our undersuits are compatible with any armor. So whenever we're adding a new undersuit, you are actually able to put any of the armors, the Explorer armor on it, the Marine armor, anything like that, the Slaver armor, you can put all that on the new stuff as well, which is part of the really fun thing about a customization system, is that anytime we add one element to it, it's actually adding a multitude of combinations, because you can create all the old ones and put that on top of the new ones and vice versa. So we're super excited about anytime we can do a new undersuit and anytime we can do a new armor, because it creates a lot of new options for the players.
The previous armors we had for the pirates at the time, or outlaw, didn't have an undersuit underneath. And so those assets were created pre, I guess, character pipeline, current pipeline we had. So right now, if you want to wear armor, you're required to wear an undersuit to go with, this is the current pipeline that we have for our characters, unless you're wearing just regular clothing, but that's a whole different topic. But the Outlaws had to go through that same process. And the concept that I did for the Light Outlaw had a really, in my opinion, really sweet looking undersuit underneath, which didn't exist. And so I remember the character artist was looking at me and was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's a new undersuit." And so I was tasked immediately to design an undersuit that would go on, that would go underneath all these armors. Obviously, you, the player, can swap the undersuit and just wear whatever you want. But we wanted like this undersuit would look best with this look. So I had to go in and I was looking at a lot of the undersuits that we had. And like the Explorer suit and the UEE Navy undersuit, and I was starting to notice that things started to look the same. Just literally, like the lines would be different, and so I thought, you know, these are Outlaws, we should make them different. And so I took a different approach to the Outlaw undersuit and made it more badass.
The biggest challenge on this guy is trying to keep in mind that aesthetically, I think that this armor looks cool with smaller proportions, like a little tighter. We've got a lot of characters that have bulky to really bulky armored suits for like a heavy combat look, and I thought the idea of having light armor that would make a character look like athletic and agile would be really cool. So, but trying to keep that light aesthetic while still functionally adhering to the volumes and you know, animation guidelines and all these other things. You know, where the joints and the skeletons get put into the character when it's rigged and etc. Trying to make sure that art meets function in an appealing way is probably the biggest challenge, especially in the face, because this mask is very skull-like. It has recessed, you know, sections in and around the cheeks. So trying to keep things looking recessed and kind of skeletal or scary is kind of tough when you're also trying to make it a certain size, you know. So that's probably been the biggest challenge on this piece.
So after the light outlaw, we're moving on to the medium outlaw. The medium outlaw also had some really iconic elements to it. Specifically, I think generally the shapes of this one were much stronger than the light. The helmet is super interesting as well, so that's something that we're trying to keep. I think all of the helmet designs we've had are pretty solid in the past, so that's something we really wanted to keep in mind with the Legacy medium. The Legacy medium is also in high poly phase right now, so eventually when we're done with that, we'll be moving on to game asset and texturing and so forth.
Because this Legacy armor is an older armor set, he would have to take cues from the new one and also take it back a couple years in tech. So going through those shapes, we added more of like a bulkier look. As you've noticed in technology today, if there's a new innovation, they tend to be big, right? And as time passes, they optimize and things get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so but it was really a team effort. It was kind of the team as a whole were kind of jumping in, jumping out, doing feedback with each other to find the shape that we thought was pretty successful, in my opinion.
The one I'm most excited to show you guys today is actually our Heavy Outlaw. I think the Heavy Outlaw is probably one of our more iconic armors just in general that we've had in the game for a long time. He was always a little bigger, a little heavier, has a really iconic helmet, and I think players have grown really attached to him. So this design is actually more of a redesign of kind of from top to bottom. We have a lot of elements that we really wanted to keep in mind with this guy because he is so iconic, but those icons are so strong that it's not hard to redesign around them. His helmet and just overall kind of bulk and size are really simple, easy silhouettes to follow, simple shape languages to follow.
So one of our character concept artists here in Los Angeles designed the Heavy Outlaw. So Josh and I kind of said, you know what, go nuts with it. And but also tell us what your process, what your idea was. And so the thing that that Michael told me was, before jumping in on it, that he noticed a lot of football padding type of shapes on the Slugger armor, and he wanted to maintain those shapes but not make it just football padding. And so he looked into actually some samurai references to make things a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more interesting. So there is a little bit of that. And also, the Slugger armor didn't look techy. It didn't look current in the Star Citizen lore. The Slugger armor looked like an armor you might see in post-apocalyptic times of today, right? Maybe something 10 years from now or 5 years from now. It didn't look like something that would be current in the lore of our game. And so Michael ran with it, added some new tech onto it, but still maintained that chunky look, that football padding type of look. So Michael also added a lot of layering onto the concept as well, so that you could, as I mentioned earlier on the tech, you could see where parts intertwine with each other and interact with each other. And so that was something interesting that Michael brought to the table, and I thought was something that the old concept or the old asset didn't have, but was a welcoming a detail that Michael put in there. So you'll see a lot of moving parts. There's a frame that the armor sits on top of a certain frame, and you can see that in the concept and also soon in the game.
One of my favorite artists that I really look up to, he said when he was redesigning characters that you either have to look at it one or two ways. You can either completely throw the thing aside and say, this is going to be something completely new, and we'll just start over and say, this is the new thing. Or you can look at the old one and kind of use it as a reference point and kind of tangent off that and redesign it from there. And that's the way we're going to go. We want to keep those in mind, and we're going to redesign from there.